Okay, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Right, so inshallah this is our fifth lesson now, covering the section relating to sabr from Madārij al Sālikīn of Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah. I think some of you probably will be joining us for the first time as we have opened the class up to more people. This is simply due to the fact that numbers have decreased as expected over the weeks, and so we're just welcoming new attendees, inshallah. So we will be reading from page 1867, and this is where Imam al-Harawi, he mentioned that there are 3 levels of sabr relating to sin. So we spoke about sins last week. So you need sabr in order to restrain yourself from committing sin. And the second level now, الدرجة الثانية, the second level, الصبر على الطاعة, having sabr in doing good deeds, بالمحافظة عليها دواما وبرعايتها إخلاصا وبتحسينها علما. So, as we said, the essence of sabr is self-restraint. So that's quite evident when it comes to sins. You need to restrain yourself so that you don't fall into sin. Sabr, when it comes to good deeds, is by بالمحافظة عليها دواما, by trying to be consistent in performing the act of ibadah, because often what happens is people, they have those periods of time where they have such bursts of energy where they want to do good deeds, and then they sort of burn out after a while. Sabr would entail that a person remains consistent. So بالمحافظة عليها دواما وبرعايتها إخلاصا. And the second area where you need to have sabr when doing good deeds is by considering the ikhlas, meaning making sure you're taking care of yourself to make sure that you are always sincere in your deeds, that you have ikhlas. وبتحسينها علما, and by essentially improving your ibadah through ilm. You're enhancing your ibadah through ilm. So you worship Allah based upon knowledge, not based upon whims, not based upon doubts, not based upon principles or notions which are alien to Islam. So these are the 3 areas by which a person adopts sabr, or he needs to adopt sabr with regards to ta'ah, with regards to good deeds. So he says, هذا يدل على أن عنده أن فعل الطاعة آكد من ترك المعصية فيكون الصبر عليها فوق الصبر على ترك المعصية في الدرجة. Now he says, Ibn Qayyim, now commentating upon Imam al-Harawi's statement, so this is Imam Ibn Qayyim's commentary, that this points to that according to him, meaning according to Imam al-Harawi, that doing good deeds is more emphasized than leaving sin. Okay, so this points to the fact that it is more emphasized to do good deeds than to leave sin, which is, as we spoke about before, we touched upon this before, this was a view that was propagated by Ibn Qayyim and his teacher Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi ala al-jami'. And although we said that this perhaps wasn't the view of the majority of scholars on this issue, فيكون الصبر عليها فوق الصبر على ترك المعصية في الدرجة. And so therefore, having sabr, okay, in doing good deeds is above the level of having sabr to restrain yourself from committing sin. So it's a degree above that. Now, in all honesty though, it's very hard to determine that from Imam al-Harawi's words, and up until now I can't see that, because Imam al-Harawi, he mentions 3 darajat, he mentions 3 levels. The first level is sabr, which is required, sabr in relation to staying away from sins. That's the first level. Then he mentions good deeds, So you might think, okay, the second means it's a degree higher. Okay, and if we mean that to be the case, then it makes sense. Then he considers sabr in abstaining, in doing good deeds, to be more virtuous and to be more emphatic. That makes sense because it's a daraja athaniya, second level, meaning a second level higher. But what negates that is the fact that when Imam al-Harawi speaks about the third principle, which is as-sabru ala al-bala, is sabr in dealing with tribulations, then that basically debunks that theory or that understanding of Imam al-Harawi's words, because nearly all scholars, they say sabr, in the sabr that you need, or the sabr that is required or encouraged when dealing with calamities, that's considered to be the lowest form of sabr. It's a more common form of sabr because that's how often people perceive sabr, but it's actually the lowest form of sabr, and that's a daraja thalitha, the third level. So actually Imam al-Harawi's words, okay, indicate, and Allah knows best, but indicates that the greatest form of sabr is the sabr that is required to abstain away from sin. Okay, and that is backed up by the hadith, the famous hadith that ما أمرتكم بشيء فأتوا منه ما استطعتم ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوا. Whatever I've prohibited you from doing, then stay away from it. Whatever I've commanded you to do it according to the best of your abilities. So, you know, it's I mean, unless there is something which is missing, okay, from Imam al-Harawi's words, that maybe there are some discrepancies in the manuscripts, perhaps. But from unless somebody else can see this, okay, and maybe can and point to Imam al-Harawi's words that indicate that he considers that ta'ah to be more emphatic and more emphasized than leaving sins. Okay. So yeah. So there are different views on this, and I'm going to be speaking about this in more detail, inshallah. So just before you start asking questions relating to this, maybe just wait until we cover this section, and then perhaps things will clear up. So someone asked me, what do I think about this? Well, I don't really have a particular. I mean, generally speaking, from my understanding, is in certain cases. Okay, I don't think it's an absolute thing. In certain cases, definitely staying away from sins is more emphasized. Okay, it depends on the situation. That thing. The thing is here, the scholars, when they spoke about this, they were speaking about in a generic way. So as a generic thing, what is more emphasized, to stay away from sins or to do good deeds? Now, I think the arguments that they use, some of the arguments that Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah used were very strong and very profound. And actually, you know, by reading some of these arguments, you appreciate a lot more of the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the nature of the Sharia. This will become evident, inshallah. Okay, so let's just read on, and then we can, you know, I'm sure you'll probably have more questions and more comments after we read this section, inshallah. So he says, وَهَذَا هُوَ الصَّوَابِ كَمَا تَقَدَّمْ. So he said, this is perhaps the more correct opinion, or this is the correct opinion, as already has preceded, i.e. that فِعْلُ الطَّاعَةِ آكَدُ مِنْ تَرْكِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ, that doing good deeds is more emphatic than staying away from sins. فَإِنَّ تَرْكَ الْمَعْصِيَةِ إِنَّمَا كَانَ لِتَكْمِيلِ الطَّاعَةِ. And this is a point here, which is very profound, that staying away from sins, abandoning sins, it's there in order to complete our acts of worship, in order to perfect our acts of worship. Meaning the whole reason why there are sins and why Allah has forbidden things is in order to complete and make our acts of worship perfect. وَالنَّهِي مَقْصُودٌ لِلْأَمْرِ. And the whole point of a nahi, the whole point of a prohibition, is maqsoodun lil amri. It's there, it's intended, a prohibition is intended for the sake of a commandment, for the sake of a commandment. فالمنهي عنه لما كان يضعف المأمور به وينقصه نهى عنه حماية وصيانة لجانب الأمر. And something which is prohibited, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, since it is something which weakens al-ma'mur bihi, it weakens that which has been commanded and it makes it more deficient. It has been prohibited as a protective measure, himayatan, and in order to safeguard the command itself. Take for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. That you who believe, do not approach prayer whilst in a state of intoxication, while being drunk, until you know that which you say. So as you know, this was towards the beginning of Islam, where drinking alcohol was permissible, but it was only made prohibited for the sake of the prayer. So don't approach the prayer whilst drunk, because you won't know what you're saying. So we can see here, this was prohibited. The act of drinking alcohol was prohibited for what purpose? للأمر, for the command, which is to pray, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not just prohibited for the sake of it, it's prohibited in order to safeguard the command. In order to safeguard the command. And that's quite profound. Okay, it's really profound, because it makes you look at the prohibitions in our Sharia from the lens of maslahah, from the lens of what is good and beneficial to mankind. Meaning that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden, it's clearly due to an overwhelming mafsada, an overwhelming harm. And in particular, it's a harm that affects the good things that we should be doing, things which have been commanded in our Sharia. So we don't just simply see a prohibition as a prohibition. Rather, it's something which, as he mentions here, يُضْعِفُ الْمَأْمُورَ بِهِ, it weakens that which has been commanded, وَيَنْقُصُهُ, and it makes it deficient. And if you observe all of the prohibitions in our Sharia, this is a quality that you will find throughout the prohibitions, for those who understand, for those who understand the nature of these prohibitions. فَجَانِبُ الْأَمْرِ أَقْوَى وَآكَدْ. So the side of commandments is generally, it's stronger and more emphatic. It's something which the Sharia emphasizes more. وَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الصِّحَّةِ. And commandments are like your siha. I mean, if you were to strike a parable, then it's like your siha, your health. وَالْحَيَاةِ, okay, and your life. وَالنَّهِي بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْحِمْيَةِ الَّتِي تُرَادُ لِحِفْظِ الصِّحَّةِ. And so imagine, for example, your health. You have your health. You need to do good things. That, you need to eat good things in order to safeguard your health. But then you have things which are prohibited, okay, in terms of your health. You shouldn't eat X, Y, and Z. You shouldn't eat foods that will poison you, that have excessive fats, etc., because that will harm. Okay, that will harm your body. So the prohibitions are like, himya, yani taking precautionary measures or dietary measures to safeguard your health. So it's there, like when we say don't eat X, Y, and Z because it's bad for your health. It's bad for your health, meaning it goes against the command to take care of your body. So the prohibitions are there for the sake of your siha, for the sake of a manfa'a, a benefit. وأسباب الحياة, and these are the reasons for life. وذكر الشيخ, and the Shaykh he mentioned, meaning Imam al-Harawi, أن الصبر في هذه الدرجة بثلاثة أشياء, that adopting sabr at this level, which is, we're talking about doing good deeds, is by three things. How do we have sabr when it comes to good deeds? دوام الطاعة, number one, being consistent in worship. دوام الطاعة والإخلاص والإخلاص فيها, being sincere, making sure that you are sincere. وقوعها على مقتضى العلم, and that these acts of worship happen according to مقتضى العلم, according to the dictates of knowledge, according to sound knowledge. وهو تحسينها علما, and that's the meaning of enhancing it or bettering it through knowledge. So you can see how sabr is related to these 3 points. دوام الطاعة, trying to be consistent, because as we mentioned before, often you'll find that many people, they will do good deeds with certain bursts of energy. There'll be certain times where they will feel very energetic, they have the energy to do good deeds, but that sort of lives for a very short period of time, and then it's like a matchstick. You light the match and then it burns for a few seconds and then it's gone. That's the case for you find with many people, but they're not consciously telling themselves, look, I need to have sabr when doing these good deeds. I shouldn't be of those people who just do things in bursts and then they lose the energy soon after. Having ikhlas, that's really important, because the more habitual you become in doing an action, the more monotonous it becomes. So as a result, you lose the sense of the action, you lose sense of the reason why you're doing it. It becomes a habitual practice. And doing the action according to knowledge, according to sound knowledge, and not according to whims. Often what you'll find is that many people, or not many people, but you'll find that there are people who just want to engage in acts of ibadah in a way that makes them feel good, without looking at whether that particular practice has been legislated by Islam or by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. So the believer looks at these areas very carefully. فإن الطاعة تتخلف من فوات واحد من هذه الثلاثة فإنه إن لم يحافظ عليها دواما عطلها وإن حافظ عليها دواما عرض لها آفتان. So an act of obedience تتخلف من فوات واحد من هذه الثلاثة, that a good deed, you might find that it will miss out, or it will fall short in one of these areas. One of these 3 areas. If it falls short in one of these 3 areas, which is again being consistent in doing the action, having sincerity, doing it according to knowledge, it will fall short. It will fall short if it basically misses out on one of these 3 areas. So therefore, فإنه إن لم يحافظ عليها دواما عطلها, that if he doesn't be consistent, that if he doesn't be consistent in doing these actions, عطلها, essentially he will he will dismiss and he will render the action null and void, in the sense that he won't end up doing it again. He just completely wastes it. وإن حافظ عليها دواما, but if he is consistent in doing the action, maybe discontinue is a good word here for وإن لم يحافظ عليها دواما عطلها. So if he's not consistent in doing it, he'll basically end up discontinuing the action. And if he chooses to be consistent in doing it through sabr, so through sabr he's consistent in doing it, then he is essentially exposed to 2 potential harms. Number 1, ترك الإخلاص فيها. He could end up basically abandoning sincerity. As we mentioned, when you do something very habitually, you end up basically lacking that sincerity. بأن يكون الباعث عليها غير وجه الله, and that is basically when a person, the driving force or the impetus to do a good deed becomes other than for the sake of Allah. وإرادته والتقرب إليه, and that you don't end up doing it for the sake of Allah and to draw closer to Him. فحفظها من هذه الآفة برعاية الإخلاص. So the way you protect yourself from this defect, from this afa, is by رعاية الإخلاص, is by considering and taking care to look after your ikhlas, your sincerity. The second potential harm that he can be exposed to, if he has the sabr to be persistent and consistent in doing that good deed, ألا تكون مطابقة للعلم, that potentially it might not occur according to sound knowledge. بحيث لا تكون على اتباع السنة, such that it's not in accordance to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فحفظها من هذه الآفة بتجريد المتابعة, and so the way you protect yourself from this defect is by متابعة, following in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following his sunnah. And that's the motto of the believer. The believer doesn't just do things based upon what feels good for him. Okay, that's what you find with a lot of people who are in search of spirituality simply for the sake of spirituality. They're doing it just because it makes them feel more spiritually elevated, regardless of where they find it, whether it's in Buddhism, whether it's in Sufism, whether it's in wherever it is. They'll just do it for that purpose. Okay, and regardless of its origin, whether it's something which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. كما أن حفظها من تلك الآفة بتجريد القصد والإرادة فلذلك قال, just as the way you preserve yourself from this defect is by making sure that your qasd, your intention, that you're doing it basically purely for the sake of Allah. And that's why he said قال بالمحافظة عليها دواما ورعايتها إخلاصا وتحسينها علما, that a person has sabr in good deeds by, number one, trying to be consistent in doing them, number two, trying to observe ikhlas during these acts, good acts, and by enhancing them or by beautifying them even through ilm, through knowledge, meaning that the actions that you perform are based on knowledge. So that concludes. So that's the second daraja. Okay, the second daraja. So can we say, as we said, if you look to what Imam al-Harawi said, and as I said, I don't believe that there is anything in Imam al-Harawi's statement that suggests that he considered doing good deeds to be more emphatic than staying away from sins. If anything, it's the other way round, because he mentioned staying away from sins to be the first daraja, the first level. Whether he classified it into three groups based upon importance is one thing. I mean, it's not clear to me that that's how he classified it, that the first level is the most important. But either way, there's nothing to suggest that he does consider it to be more important than the other. There's nothing there. So going back to maybe some of the points that what is probably, I mean, I think it's difficult to, my position here is not to say one is more correct than the other. I think we're here to learn people's perspectives on this. Practically speaking, though, what impact should it have? I mean, practically speaking, it shouldn't mean that we should become more lax in doing good deeds or become more lax in trying to stay away from sins. At the end of the day, both are emphasized in our religion. But I think the perspective of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah on this definitely makes the believer more conscious about trying to understand why things are prohibited, because it's clearly prohibited for the sake of a benefit, okay, for the sake of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so if you look to, for example, the sin, the original sin, okay, whether it be Adam alayhi salam, he was prohibited from eating from the tree, and Shaitan was commanded to prostrate. Now, this is obviously the argument that Ibn Taymiyyah used, rahimahullah, that there was a commandment to prostrate, and that commandment to prostrate was greater than the prohibition to eat from the tree. The proof of that is, look at the consequence. The fact that Iblis, he didn't prostrate, he was cursed for eternity. Whereas Adam alayhi salam, his sin was forgiven. Allah inspired him with words of forgiveness and he was forgiven. So, but as I mentioned before, I think this is a difficult mas'ala, or this is a difficult example to use to establish this particular perspective, because the degrees of commandments and prohibitions, they differ. Okay, so even though we might argue that staying away from sins is more emphatic, okay, than good deeds, there are definitely good deeds which are more emphatic than staying away from particular sins. So, for example, the command to pray 5 times a day, that's more stressed than, say, for example, the prohibition, just say, for example, not to trade after the adhan on Jum'ah. You know, what's more emphatic? Clearly, you can't compare. Clearly, to pray 5 times a day is more important than, say, a prohibition relating to trade on Jum'ah after the adhan has been made. So, yeah, we can't just use individual examples to establish this one's perspective. And I think it's difficult to do that because commandment and prohibitions are of various different levels and degrees. But as I said, a profound thing that you can learn from this is that it teaches you to try to understand why things are prohibited. Okay, why things are, because they're prohibited for the sake of a manfa', they're prohibited for the sake of a particular benefit. And this will actually have an impact on the way a person does ijtihad even as well, and a way a person perceives prohibitions in terms of whether it be through making those prohibitions analogous, and maybe those prohibitions due to the different circumstances could be viewed in different ways. Okay, so all right, okay, so that concludes that section. Let me just see if there are any questions. There's a question about fidya. Okay, I won't answer that now. That's not related to the class. Yeah, exactly. So do you think it is context dependent, which is better, doing good deed, leaving sin? It depends on the person's circumstances. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it as well. Is there a way of telling if we are doing good deeds out of love of Allah or more out of fear? Probably touch upon that later. So if we don't know the meanings of our salah, are we in a state of drunkenness? Like Imam al-Ghazali basically said that. Imam al-Ghazali, he said that people who pray not understanding what they're saying, they're like people who approach prayer in a state of intoxication. They don't know what they're saying. So that's why it's very important for people to learn the meanings of prayer. Okay. Tajreed al-qasd basically means making your qasd, your intention, purely. Tajreed means to like single it out, literally to strip it, meaning you're stripping away anything that is unwanted in your intention. So your qasd is pure, your intention is pure for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, okay, alhamdulillah. Okay, let's continue then, inshallah. Faslun. الدرجة الثالثة. So now we're moving on to the third level, which is الصبر في البلاء. Sabr in relation to bala, tribulations. And this we said is the lowest form. And that's attained by three things again. بملاحظة حسن الجزاء, by taking into consideration or by noting the good reward that you can attain, from the act itself. وانتظار روح الفرج, and secondly by looking for basically the relief to come. And thirdly, وتهوين البلية بعد الأيادي المنن وتذكر سوالف النعم. And thirdly, by belittling the tribulation, by basically counting the favors of Allah and remembering the previous blessings that Allah has bestowed upon you, سوالف النعم, the previous blessings. So by doing those three things, that's how you observe sabr. Firstly, by again reflecting and by noting the reward for having patience, and secondly by looking for the jaza, looking for the relief, because there is no difficulty except that it is followed by relief, and thirdly by counting the favors of God and remembering the previous blessings of Allah, which therefore makes you belittle the tahween, the baliyah itself. Any reasons why the third one has its own fasl? I don't know whether that's a good point. Why does it have its own fasl? Could be like a slip of the pen, maybe, Yeah, it could be the editor. Yeah. I don't think that was in the original Arabic, in the Matan, Madārij al Sālikīn, but probably something good to look into. So هذه ثلاثة أشياء, these are ثلاثة أشياء, these are three things, تبعث على الصبر في البلاء. So these are three matters which help a person to push a person towards having sabr when dealing with calamities. إحداها, the first thing, ملاحظة حسن الجزاء. The first thing is by taking into consideration the reward, وعلى حسب ملاحظته والوثوق به ومطالعته يخف حمل البلاء لشهود العوض. And so therefore, in accordance to your observation of the reward for being patient and taking it into consideration, basically, taking this burden of this bala will become lighter upon you. يخف حمل البلاء. Why? لشهود العوض, because you can witness the compensation, you can say, for the sabr that you are going through. So basically, when you go through a calamity, you tell yourself, let me observe sabr, so that I can attain ajr in the afterlife. Now here, this is a point. I want everyone to maybe pause and reflect on this. Now, let's be frank with ourselves and ask ourselves, whenever we go for a sudden calamity, we lose someone who is beloved to us, or something happens, we lose all of our wealth, or something, a baliyah, standard, test and tribulation. For many of us, it'll be very difficult to think about reward. Okay, for many of us, it will be difficult for us to think about reward. And in fact, for a lot of people, if they were given the choice of having all of the pleasures in the dunya, in the world, okay, and not have to go through that calamity, a lot of people will probably choose, okay, not to go through that calamity. They'd rather not go through that calamity, because I don't care, give me all the wealth in the world. I would rather have my father or my mother present with me if they passed away. You don't think about reward. You don't think about pleasures. You don't think about na'im, rivers and trees and things like that. A lot of people won't. Okay, a lot of people won't. So when we say husnul jaza, now jaza, this is what we have to understand. Jaza in the afterlife, reward in the afterlife, is not simply because often we play this, give the lip service to this word reward. I'm doing this for the sake of reward. But what do we what do we mean by reward? What are we actually looking for? What are we actually looking for? Does your heart actually yearn for things that are mentioned in the Quran about paradise? Does your heart actually yearn for trees and rivers and silk brocade? Does your heart yearn for those things? Does your heart yearn for a hur al-ain, for example? Are these things that everyone yearns for intrinsically? Therefore, they become an impetus for them to have sabr. Or is it more than that? Husnul jaza, reward in the afterlife, we have to understand, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about what lies in the afterlife, Allah is addressing all of humanity. And people are of different levels, and this is something that I'm trying to really make people become aware of, that, and for people to see that people are of different levels. There are certain things that appeal to some people but won't appeal to other people. Okay, and so for jaza, it goes beyond. One thing you have to understand: jaza goes beyond the sensual pleasures. It goes beyond just satisfying yourself and gratifying yourself sensually in the afterlife. Your husnul jaza could be eternal bliss, where you are not suffering any worry, any grief, and you are in the company of righteous people. You're in the company of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're in the company of the prophets and the anbiya. That is husnul jaza. Okay, for a lot of people that will be husnul jaza. That will be good reward. That's something to look forward to. That if I have sabr, and if I deal with this, trial and tribulation, then if I have that sabr, this is what I have in return. Allah will remove this grief from me that I'm suffering from temporarily. Okay, and inshallah in the afterlife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward me with happiness, with tranquility, with peace of mind, and being in the best of company. And so that's what we need to think about. So, again, don't just throw about these terms lightly, like thawab and I'm doing this for ajr. Okay, think about it carefully. What is it that you really desire? Okay, what is it that your heart yearns for? Because these are the things that should be pushing us to do the good deeds that we do. And it shouldn't just be lip service, and it shouldn't just be things that we say very, very easily. They must be based upon, deep thought, deep reflection, and there must be things which are meaningful to you. Otherwise, it's just, terms that we throw about, very, very lightly. Like, yeah, I'm doing this for the sake of Allah, or I'm doing this because I want ajr. Okay, but what does it actually mean to you? Okay, so right, okay, we will stop inshallah for Salat al-Maghrib, and if I can just, we will resume maybe at, say, we'll resume at 8:30. Okay, we'll resume at 8:30 inshallah. Okay. Okay, inshallah, we will resume. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I've gone back to my old camera. Okay, so let's just see if anyone has any questions before we resume. Someone asked, is it different to wanting Allah's pleasure solely? That's something that I don't think we discussed maybe in this class. I think it was another the Mukhtasar Minhaj al Qasidin class. But doing an action because solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, according to a number of scholars, is of a higher degree than simply doing an action for reward. I don't say mere reward, but due to for reward. Video is still fuzzy, is it, for some people? All right. Yeah, I mean, some people are saying it's fine. Some people. Anyway, as long as you can, as long as you can hear and just about see me, that should be okay, inshallah. Right. Is there a dua from the Sunnah or Quran remaining steadfast on good deeds? Yeah, so there are a number of du'as, like the du'a, Allahumma habib ilayna al-iman, or Allahumma inna nasaluka al-jannata wa ma qarraba ilayha min qawlin aw amal. So, we ask you of paradise and everything that leads you to paradise. وَنَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنَ النَّارِ وَمَا قَرَّبَ إِلَيْهَا مِنْ قَوْلٍ أَوْ عَمَلٍ. And we seek refuge from the hellfire and from those deeds that lead to the hellfire. And generally asking for istiqamah, asking for steadfastness, generally or asking for tathbit, Allahumma ya muthabbit al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik, etc. So, yeah. Allahumma afrigh alayna sabra as well. Oh Allah, pour patience upon us. Yeah, Al Imran verse 8, yes. How can we make the determination last? It's I think with many of these spiritual stations, it's all dependent upon meditation and deep thought, in the sense that a person, what you'll find, a common feature, you'll find people who do not have that level of steadfastness or determination. They're not people of deep thought and reflection, and so therefore they're moved by bursts of energy, bursts of when they feel that moment when they feel spiritually elevated, and so they just take advantages of those particular moments. But people of deeper thought and deeper reflection, you tend to find them to be more consistent in their deeds. How can we strengthen our patience at times of tribulations when you fail to see any good from the situation? I know Allah is as you see Him. How can you move away from the idea that the test or tribulation is a form of punishment? Because the test of the tribulation, the goodness, I mean, what is the goodness that comes from a test or tribulation? We don't know what that goodness is. It could be that there is no immediate goodness in this worldly life. It could be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you just to see how you respond, and that there will be no eventual relief. Okay, relief in this world. And the relief, sometimes it comes to people in the afterlife. It might not come in this world. Or that Allah gives them relief from another perspective in life. But He might not relieve you from that one particular trial. So it could be that a person, for example, has a trial up until the day that they die. So what does that mean? Allah didn't fulfill His promise? Inna ma'al usri yusra? No. There will eventually be a relief that will come to the person, one way or another. But we don't know what the goodness is that comes from a trial. We don't know what it is. It could be the fact that you have been broken. That could be the goodness that Allah wanted from you. Discipline and regime is a result of consideration, and action is predicated on well thought out intentions, rewards, motivations, and awareness of potential obstacles. Actions do not depend on mood. Be a soldier of Allah. Jazakallah khair. Was well put. Considering not understanding meaning of prayer is likened to drunkenness. Is it better to pray Taraweeh with surahs you know, versus completing Quran with an imam? There are too many factors in this. I think that there are too many factors in this to give you a generic answer. So obviously in this situation, due to the lockdown, I don't think there is a situation where you can pray with an imam unless you're praying at home. Okay, so in that situation, I don't know how relevant the question is for this particular moment in time. Okay, we will continue then. Right, where did we stop? Here. So we said with regards to the three things that help one to adopt sabr during tribulation. So the first thing we mentioned is by basically noticing the reward or anticipating the jaza, the reward. We say وهذا كما يخف على كل متحمل مشقة عظيمة حملها لما يلاحظ من لذة عاقبتها وظفرها بها. That just as a person basically takes on this great burden of dealing with that tribulation, and that could be also due to what he notices of the pleasure of the aqibah, the eventual ending, meaning that a relief will come in one form or another, or there will be some goodness in one way or another. Maybe at that particular time you don't know what it is, but it will eventually come. وَلَوْلَا ذَلِكَ لَتَعَطَّلَتْ مَصَالِحُ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. And if it wasn't for this basic principle, then the benefits for in life would cease, would come to an end. Meaning, what's he talking about? He's saying that people undertake difficulties because they know of the eventual result will bring about goodness to them. And that's a principle in life, not just in religious affairs. It's a principle in life. A person, for example, studies in a university. They study for years, 3 or 4 years of their life. They go through hardship. They go through sleepless nights. Why? Because they know there's an end result. They'll end up graduating. They'll have a degree. What they do with that, Allah knows best. But but it's goodness there. There's khair there. Okay, I'm not trying to belittle degrees, but people use it in different ways. And likewise, other things in life, you go through a lot of suffering. Like if you're a mother, for example, you go through the difficulties of pregnancy in order to, and you know that I'm going through that, not just for the sake of it, but at the end there will be a child. Okay, and so that's a principle in life that we all, and if it wasn't for that, if we didn't stick to this principle, we will never attain any maslahah in life. We will never attain bring about any goodness to us in our lives. And this is what differentiates in many ways man from other creatures. And he says, وَمَا أَقْدَمَ أَحَدٌ عَلَى تَحَمُّلِ مَشَقَّةٍ عَاجِلَةٍ إِلَّا لِثَمَرَةٍ مُؤَجَّلَةٍ. And no person seeks to undertake a difficulty, an immediate difficulty, except due to that there will be an eventual thamara, there will be an eventual reward, that will come later. فَالنَّفْسُ مُوَكَّلَةٌ بِحُبِّ الْعَاجِلِ. But the problem is that the people, they are basically, in other versions, muli'a, which means they're obsessive about loving the immediate things. They love the immediate things, and they always sort of, that's the nature of man. He does things in haste. وَإِنَّمَا خَاصَةُ الْعَقْلِ. But the significant thing about our intellects, the unique thing about our intellects, تُلَمِّحُ الْعَوَاقِبِ. تُلَمِّحُ الْعَوَاقِبِ basically makes us consider the end results of things. Unlike animals, what you'll find, they just want to do things immediately. They don't think about consequences of their actions. ومطالعة الغايات, and the aql, our intellects, make us think about the ghayat, the eventual results of our deeds. This is delayed gratification. Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Delayed gratification. وأجمع العقلاء من كل أمة على أن النعيم لا يدرك بالنعيم. This is another principle in life as well, that all intelligent people from every nation are agreed that pleasures are not attained by pleasures. Okay, if you want to achieve something which is pleasurable and something which brings you comfort, you don't achieve it through something which is comfortable. Okay, you have to toil, you have to go through hardship. وأن من رافق الراحة فارق الراحة. And the one who رافق, the one who accompanies comfort and luxury, فارق الراحة, they will eventually leave comfort and luxury. So for example, if you want to have a beautiful home and you want to live in comfort, you have to go through hardship to attain that. But if you just sit at home all day enjoying your comfortable furniture, enjoying your delicious foods, okay, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to lose that raha, because that's a principle in life. وأن قدر التعب تكون الراحة. And that another principle, and the principle is that your level of comfort in life is in accordance to the how much you go through, how much hardship you go through in life. So therefore, this is why we need to have sabr, because it's through sabr we understand that it's through the hardship that eventually we will, relief will eventually come about. على قدر أهل العزم تأتي العزائم وتأتي على قدر الكريم الكرائم ويكبر في عين الصغير صغارها وتصغر في عين العظيم العظائم. So a line of poetry to reiterate that point, which is basically saying that it's in accordance to basically how much hardship that you will get, resolute outcomes, and it's accordance to your generosity, how you would basically be honored. And the small things in life basically become ويكبر في عين الصغير صغارها وتصغر في عين العظيم العظائم. So basically based on your perception of things and your foresight, that's what you will achieve in life. والقصد, and the meaning here, والقصد يعني المقصود here أن ملاحظة حسن العاقبة تعين على الصبر فيما تتحمله باختيارك وغير اختيارك. The meaning here, therefore, in conclusion, basically is that by a person observing or trying to look for the good result at the end, this helps a person to be patient, okay, in those things that he chooses to do out of his own accord, or those things that basically happen to him without his decision. والثاني, and the second thing that a person that the second thing that you adopt in order to help you to be patient in dealing with calamities. So the first is, we said, looking for the good end and the good reward in the afterlife. The second, انتظار روح الفرج, waiting for the relief, or the spirit of relief, or the comfort of the relief. يعني راحته ونسيمه ولذته, i.e., waiting for the relief and the comfort and the pleasure that will come thereafter. فإن انتظاره ومطالعته وترقبه يخفف حمل المشقة, because looking for these things, waiting in line for these things basically helps to lighten our burdens. ولا سيما عند قوة الرجاء, and this is especially true when we have an extremely high level of hope. والقطع بالفرج, and we are certain that the relief will come. So the greater your hopes are, The greater your hopes are, and the more certain you are that relief will come, the easier it will be to have sabr. And that's why it's important. The hadith is important. أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِي بِي. I am as my servant expects me to be. And so it's important that we do strengthen our hopes in Allah when we go through trials and tribulations, that He will relieve us from this. Because if you think like that of Allah, that is how He will be. But if you think negatively of Allah, then Allah won't come to your assistance. And that's what a lot of people lack when they go through hardships. They lose hope. They lose hope, and they think there's no point. That why am I being punished, or why am I being tested in this way? They don't have that joy of having hope in Allah, because that's what it is. It's joy. It brings about happiness to you. فإنه يجد في حشو البلاء من روح الفرج ونسيمه وراحته. Because this person will find in the midst of his calamity the comfort of hoping for this relief and joy. ما هو من خفي الألطاف. These are the things which are from the discreet subtleties, divine subtleties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very discreet and fine things that if a person was to look for and observe, they will achieve, so many great things. وما هو فرج معجل وبه وبغيره يفهم معنى اسمه اللطيف. And it's basically by reflecting over these things that you appreciate the meaning of the name of Allah, Al-Latif. Al-Latif, which often we translate as the gentle one, but it's someone who, lutf is not just gentleness, but it's being aware of the finer and intricate realities of things. So when someone, for example, is unaware of your sensitivities, it's very easy for them to hurt you. But when someone is aware of all of your sensitivities and all of the things that trigger you, okay, this is lutf. This is lutf. This is that precision and that degree of knowledge and gentleness combined together. This is the meaning of the name Al-Latif. والثالث, and the third thing is تهوين البلية. Al-Latif, the subtle one. That's a way you can translate it. والثالث تهوين البلية بأمرين. The third thing is to belittle the difficulty that you are going through. Okay, belittle the calamity or the trial that you're going through. بأمرين, by one of two things. أحدهما أن يعد نعم الله عليه وأياديه عنده. Is that a person starts to count the blessings of Allah upon him. فإذا عجز عن عدها وأيس من حصرها هان عليه ما هو فيه من البلاء. And if he's incapable of enumerating all of the blessings, and he despairs in trying to count all of them, then this will basically belittle what he's going through. Because he thinks, subhanallah, look how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me. بالنسبة إلى أيادي الله ونعمه كقطرة من بحر. And especially in relation to the blessings of Allah, this trial that he is going through, in relation to what Allah has blessed him with, it's like a drop in an ocean. It's like a drop of water in an ocean. That drop of water basically is the calamity or the difficulty that you're going through, but you have this whole ocean of blessings from Allah. So that helps a person to have sabr. والثاني, the second, تذكر سوالف النعم, remembering the previous blessings that Allah has bestowed upon you. التي أنعم الله بها عليه. فهذا يتعلق بالماضي. This is connected to the past now. وتعداد أيادي المنن, and remembering all the accounts of blessings from Allah. يتعلق بالحال. It's basically taking into consideration what you have at that present moment in time. وملاحظة حسن الجزاء وانتظار الروح الفرج. And whereas looking for the good rewards or the consequences and how a person will be rewarded in the afterlife and hoping for relief, this is related to the future. This is related to the future. So there are things to think about in the past, present, and future. وأحدهما في الدنيا والثاني يوم الجزاء. Okay, so one of the two is in the world. Okay, meaning the blessings of Allah in this world. وَالثَّانِي يَوْمَ الْجَزَاء. The second is in the afterlife, i.e. the reward that you will get in the afterlife. ويحكى عن امرأة من العباد أنها عثرت فانقطعت إصبعها. It is reported that there was a woman who was from the devout worshippers, that one day she sort of tripped over and she fell over and she cut her finger. فضحكت, and then she began to smile. And this is similar to that story that we mentioned before about the scholar who went to that tyrant and enjoined the good and forbade the evil. What happened to him? So what happened? She fell over, she cut her finger. فقال لها بعض من معها, that some of those who are around her, they said to her, أتضحكين? Why are you laughing? Are you laughing? And you cut your finger? What are you laughing for? فقالت, so she said, أخاطبك على قدر عقلك. I'm going to speak to you in a way that you will understand. Okay, so this is implying that these people around her, basically they don't know what she knows and they don't have her sort of level of understanding. So she said, حلاوة أجرها أنستني مرارة ذكرها. So the sweetness of the reward of cutting my finger made me forget the bitterness of remembering this trial. Okay, so the sweetness of the reward has made me forget the bitterness of what I'm going through now. إشارة إلى أن عقله لا يتحمل ولا يحتمل ما فوق هذا المقام. And she said this in a way pointing to alluding to the fact that basically his mind cannot, it cannot understand beyond this. So she used like a very simple term, or it's not even actually a simple expression. It's quite deep and profound if you think about it. But that's how she's mentioned it to him, just to make him understand. من ملاحظة المبتلي. Okay, so that's what a person should be focused about. Then just being focused on the tribulation itself. ومشاهدة حسن الاختياره لها في ذلك البلاء. And that a person should witness or try to understand and witness why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose that for her in that tribulation, meaning there's khair in it, there's goodness in it. وتلذذها بشكر له, and by enjoying and having pleasure by showing gratitude for what they're going through and being content with it. ومقابلة ما جاء من قبله بالحمد والشكر, and that you should greet such things with gratitude and thanks. Like it was said, كما قيل لئن ساءني أن نلتني بمساءة فقد سرني أني خطرت ببالك. That if لئن ساءني أن نلتني بمساءة, يعني if I've been afflicted, although it hurts me that I have been afflicted with something, at the same time though it pleases me أني خطرت ببالك, that basically I have that you have thought about me. Okay, it pleases me that you want to test me, meaning in reference to Allah. It pleases me that you have thought about me, that you want to test me to elevate my ranks, etc. So the idea here is that the person's mind is focused on the mubtali, okay, on the one who has placed the tribulation there in the first place, who is Allah, rather than focusing on the trial or tribulation itself. Okay, so that concludes that section relating to the 3 degrees of sabr, or the 3 areas where you need to have sabr. Just a few comments here. I think the lower self defeats that counting of blessings by comparing quality of blessing. I have a nice collection. I have a nice collection of shoes, but I have lost my legs. How do we make sense of that? I mean, it doesn't have to be that. Okay, it doesn't have to be that. Obviously, when you count the blessings, the blessings of certain things might not be apparent to you. Okay, but there are clearly things in life that will be blessings. That's the idea here. And you remember, you won't be able to enumerate the blessings. It could be, look, you have a lot of shoes, but you've lost your legs, but you can sell those shoes and maybe get like a prosthetic leg or something. So you don't know where the blessing lies. Yeah. Okay, someone's camera is on. Let me just see. Okay, it's gone now. Sorry, there are more questions above. A criticism of the experiment with the children being offered two sweets. If they don't take the first, the poor children are habituated to take what they have now because they have no guarantee for the future. I guess hereafter is a different league of consequences. What we have said, but worldly results. Okay, there's another question someone asked from last week. Okay, last week you mentioned you would address the Prophet ﷺ and Yaqub when they both shed tears for their lost sons, but I heard the whole thing to the end and you never noticed the points you wanted to make about them. I was really interested to know if they had to practice sabr or how they practice it, because obviously they both loved Allah and His decree, and they were both in the highest stations of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, okay, that's going back to last week, but I mean, very quickly, we mentioned that, and this is what Ibn Qayyim, he mentioned, that it's within the tabi'ah, the nature of man, to feel pain. Okay, to feel pain during calamities, etc. So the station of mahabba shouldn't make a person basically lose their sense of humanity, or lose their human qualities of feeling pain and suffering. Okay, now, it was said that Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad, this is one of the things he was maybe criticized for, that he was a person that when he became a devout person, he was rarely seen smiling. Okay, but the day his son died, he smiled. And he said, people were shocked. And he said, this is how I show my rida. I mean, look, it's, this is, putting aside Fudayl ibn Iyad, rahimahullah, who was one of the greatest worshippers of our heritage. But look, human beings have an intrinsic quality to feel pain. If they lose someone, they will feel pain. The question is how they deal with that. That's the issue. How do they deal with that? We can't suppress those feelings to the degree that we eradicate them. You can't eradicate sadness when losing someone. But this is why sabr is virtuous. This is why sabr is virtuous, according to how most scholars would understand that. But as you know, Imam al-Harawi was of the view that, once you reach a certain level of mahabba, then sabr is no longer really required, or in fact it becomes, in a way, a shortcoming. Right. And the other question was about Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, died in prison. I'm sure his family had hoped he would be released. How do we make sense of that in light of this? Again, it's the relief might not be in this life. It could be the fact that he died was their relief, in the sense that he is no longer suffering. In the sense that he is no longer suffering in prison, and so therefore the fact that he passed away, that was relief for them. Or the relief comes in the afterlife. If someone says, I wish I was dead, does that mean they failed to the test and what is the consequence. No, it doesn't know, because there are times where wishing for death is not a bad thing. Okay, that's maybe beyond this class at the moment. Okay, regarding remembering blessings given to us, a relative told me about his teacher who memorized the Quran after he became blind at the age of 12, and he said that being able to see the words of Allah in and of itself is a blessing. It goes to show that there aren't so many ways that appreciate a single blessing. Yeah, I think there was an assumption here that relief is immediate justice. That's true. Yeah. Okay, right. Let's continue, inshallah. Sorry if I can't read everyone's comments and questions. We need to press on, inshallah. So sabr is not for the muhibbin. They can feel pain, but they don't need to exercise sabr because they surpassed it. Okay, I said, yeah. So sabr is not for the muhibbin. That's a question. Yeah. So according to Imam al-Harawi, no. Once you reach the level of mahabba, then it's not really a thing for you. Sabr is not really for you. But they can still feel the pain, but they don't need to exercise sabr because they have surpassed it. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I mean, according to Imam al-Harawi, I think he would agree with that. Yeah. But not according to Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, al-Jani'. Faslun, chapter. قال وأضعف الصبر لله وهو صبر العامة وفوقه الصبر بالله وهو صبر المريدين وفوقه الصبر على الله وهو صبر السالكين. So he says that the weakest form of sabr is sabr for the sake of Allah. Okay, this is going to be controversial. Again, this is another point in the text where Ibn Qayyim is going to differ with Imam al-Harawi, so pay attention to this. He said the weakest form of patience is sabr for the sake of Allah. And this is the sabr of lay people, of common people, of common folk. وَفَوْقُهُ الصَّبْرُ بِاللَّهِ. Above that is sabr billah, yani patience through Allah, attaining patience through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ صَبْرُ الْمُرِيدِينَ. And that is the sabr of the seekers. Okay, so murid is a seeker, meaning a person who is seeking the path of salvation, is trying to traverse a path of spirituality. That's the meaning of murid. And that's the sabr of the muridin. وَفَوْقُ الصَّبْرُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And above that is sabr with Allah, or literally on Allah, but yani with Allah, sabr with Allah, and we'll come to explain what that means. وَهُوَ صَبْرُ السَّالِكِينَ. And that is the sabr of the wayfarers. That is the sabr of the wayfarers. So we have 3 levels of sabr. The lowest form is sabr for the sake of Allah, which is for lay people. The second is sabr through Allah, and that is the sabr of the seekers. And then you have the sabr with Allah, and that is the sabr of the wayfarers. So these are people who already now, they're on the path, they're on their way to Allah. Whereas murideen are people, they're just like waiting to go. Yeah? They're looking, they're seeking the path. Whereas salikin are already on the path. وَمَعْنَى كَلَامِهِ. And the meaning of his words is أن صبر العامة لله, that the sabr of the lay people is for the sake of Allah. أي رجاء ثوابه, i.e. seeking reward, seeking his reward. مع الله. وخوف عقابه, and fearing his punishment. So that's why they're doing it. They're doing it for the sake of Allah, meaning they're hoping for his reward and they're afraid of his punishment. So that's the lay people. That's why they adopt sabr. Okay, well, that's that's their level of sabr. They do it for reward and they do it out of fear of punishment. وَصَبْرُ الْمُرِيدِينَ بِاللَّهِ. But the sabr of the seekers is billah. وَصَبْرُ الْمُرِيدِينَ بِاللَّهِ. And the sabr of the seekers is through Allah. أي بقوته ومعونته, meaning they attain sabr, they want to attain sabr through Allah. Okay, so they see that I can't do anything, I can't have sabr unless Allah yusabbiruni, unless Allah grants me sabr. So they just see themselves incapable of sabr without the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهُمْ لَا يَرَوْنَ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ صَبْرًا. So they themselves cannot see themselves to adopt sabr. وَلَا قُوَّةَ عَلَيْهِ, and they have no strength to do it. بَلْ حَامِلُهُمْ التَّحَقُّقْ بِ لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. But the thing that gets them to that level of sabr is لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. There is no might nor power save in Allah. عِلْمًا وَمَعْرِفَةً وَحَالًا. That they know this, they become cognizant of it, it's deeply embedded in their hearts, and for them it becomes a spiritual station that they can't do anything without the help of and assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's of a higher degree. That's the sabr of the murideen. And above that is the sabrun ala Allah. Sabr ala Allah, with Allah, ala ahkamihi. They have sabr with Allah's ahkam, rulings, whether it be rulings of worldly nature or rulings of sharia. إذا صاحبه يشهد المتصرف فيه. So this person, he sees the mutasarrif, i.e. Allah. Mutasarrif means the one who basically interacts with everything, meaning what he decrees in terms of rulings, what he decrees in terms of what he sees in terms of what Allah has decreed in terms of worldly calamities, or decree certain events. He just sees Allah, everything, in Allah's hand in everything, basically. فهو يصبر على أحكامه الجارية عليه. So he is patient with whatever Allah decrees. If Allah tells him to do something, he will do it. If Allah tells him not to do something, he won't do it. If Allah takes someone from his life, this is Allah's decree. Because this person is in a perpetual state of sabr, because they just see Allah in everything. جالبة عليه بما جلبت من محبوب ومكروه فهذه درجة الصبر السالكين. So this is basically the sabr of the wayfarers. وهؤلاء الثلاثة عندهم من العوام إذ هو في مقام الصبر وقد ذكر أنه للعامة وأنه من أضعف منازلهم. So he mentioned the three levels, okay, the three types of people: the awam, the lay people, the seekers, and the wayfarers. And he's mentioned basically that the lay people, they are of the weakest of levels. هذا تقرير كلامه. This is just an evaluation of what he said, or this is just basically an account of what Imam al-Harawi said. والصواب. And then he says والصواب. So this basically means, but what is correct? Basically, this is where he differs from Imam al-Harawi. And this is quite a subtle point, so pay attention to this point. أن الصبر لله فوق الصبر بالله. Now, in Ibn al-Qayyim's opinion, sabr for the sake of Allah is greater than the sabr through Allah. Okay, now sabr for the sake of Allah is above, meaning greater than the sabr through Allah. وأعلى درجة وأجل. It's of a higher degree and more honorable. Why? فإن الصبر لله متعلق بالإلهية. Because the sabr for the sake of Allah, it is connected to Allah's ilahiyya. And what is ilahiyya? So, as you know, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and Ibn al-Qayyim, they often spoke about the division of Tawheed into three. Tawheed Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, and Asma' wa Sifat. Ibn al-Qayyim actually was quite different in the sense that he often spoke about Tawheed al-Irada and Tawheed al-Qasd. So he worded it differently. But anyhow, but Ilahiyya refers to ibadah, basically worship. The tawheed of Allah's entitlement to worship. His entitlement to worship. This is what he means by Ilahiyya. Allah's right to being worshipped. So sabr for the sake of Allah, that's connected to his entitlement to worship. Okay, so being patient for the sake of Allah as opposed to being patient because you want some worldly gain. Okay, you're being patient because you want something worldly. That's not for the sake of Allah. So doing something for the sake of Allah is related to his ilahiyya, his right to being worshipped. But sabrun bihi, having sabr through Allah, meaning by Allah giving you the tawfiq to be able to be patient, that's connected, muta'alliqun bi rububiyyatihi, that's connected to Allah's lordship. To Allah's lordship. Meaning that Allah has, he is a Rabb, He's a controller of the heavens and the earth. He creates you, He has created you, He sustains you, He manages you, He safeguards you, He protects you, He harms you, He gives you, He grants you the ability to have iman, He grants you the ability to have sabr. So this is from the manifestations of Allah's rububiyyah. To grant you sabr is from the manifestations of Allah's rububiyyah. So therefore we have established that sabrun lillah is connected to Allah's ilahiyya. Sabrun billah is connected to Allah's rububiyyah. And then he says this, وَمَا تَعَلَّقَ بِإِلَهِيَّتِهِ أَكْمَلُ وَأَعْلَى مِمَّا تَعَلَّقَ بِرُبُوبِيَّتِهِ. Therefore, and that which is connected to Allah's entitlement to worship, it is more complete and greater than that which is connected to his lordship. Okay, so this is quite a deep and profound point. And this is, by the way, something which is quite contentious. Okay, this is quite contentious. Maybe this is not the place to discuss this, but Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, they were clear proponents of that ilahiyya is more emphasized than rububiyyah. Allah's right to being worshipped is more stressed, than affirming Allah's rububiyyah, than affirming Allah's lordship. And that affirming Allah's lordship, it necessarily leads to ilahiyya. Okay. This is something that they were critiqued on, okay, but again, this is not the place for that. So he's saying, look, because sabrun lillah is connected to Allah's ilahiyya, and Allah's ilahiyya is more emphatic and more stressed upon than establishing Allah's rububiyyah, then from that perspective, having sabr for the sake of Allah, it's greater than having sabr through Allah and seeing that you can only have sabr through Allah. And he will explain this even further. The ahkam here are legislative or naturalistic? Both. Yeah, both. Yeah, so that point about Harawi doesn't say all three are from the awam, just the first. Yeah, so this particular sentence is a problematic sentence. I tried to look at different versions of the book to see if there was an issue here, but there's something wrong with this sentence. That's why I didn't even translate it completely. Can you give an example of having sabr through seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You're talking about sabr billah. If you're talking about sabr billah, that's when a person basically resigns himself to Allah and says, Ya Allah, I cannot have sabr. I cannot have sabr without you. Okay, and so they resign their affairs and they give it solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this issue of comparing, in my opinion, comparing between sabr lillah and sabr billah is like comparing apples and bananas. You're comparing two different things. And they're not up for comparison, in my opinion. Okay, that's just my humble opinion. But let's just carry on for now, inshallah. is not the one who, this is a point here, is not the one who has sabr for the sake of Allah still granted the tawfiq of those who seek sabr billah, or is it a matter of intention? No, because a person could be patient for the sake of Allah, but they don't see themselves that, they might see themselves to be the cause behind their sabr. Like, look, I'm being patient for the sake of Allah, and I want my reward, and inshallah I will have reward. Yeah, so they're not resigning their sabr to Allah. They're seeing it's through their own efforts. They're seeing it through their own efforts. Okay, and this is why the Sālikīn are distinct from the Awam. Awam, basically, they try to achieve everything through their own effort, through their own power, through their own qualities. Okay, whereas the Sālikīn and the Murideen, the seekers and the wayfarers, they're beyond that. I mean, they're not of that degree. They don't see no quwwah or hawl in themselves. Okay, and this is why I've always had an issue with life coaching and these things, because it's not the path of the murideen and the Sālikīn. It's for awam, basically, and it shouldn't be made out to anyway. But I'm not going to start talking about that. But okay, but what about if my sabr is my sabr is for his sake, and I cannot be patient without his aid and permission? So you're combining between sabr lillah and billah, which takes you to the second degree, which is really sabr billah. Because and Ibn Qayyim will mention the different combinations, because you can have sabr billah, but you're not doing it for lillah. Yeah. Okay, but what is greater is to have sabr billah lillah. Yeah. So inshallah, so it will come. This is where it gets really interesting as well, actually. So they can coexist. It'll come, inshallah. Yeah, they can coexist, and he'll explain how they can coexist. Wait. Okay. Yeah. Okay. وَلِأَنَّ الصَّبْرَ لَهُ عِبَادَةٌ. Okay, now we're going back to the point about sabr lillah being, because this Ibn Qayyim, he sees it to be better because it's related to Allah's ilahiyya. وَلِأَنَّ الصَّبْرَ لَهُ عِبَادَةٌ, because sabr for the sake of Allah is an act of ibadah. وَالصَّبْرُ بِهِ isti'ana, and seeking, and this is a very profound point here, and seeking sabr through Allah is isti'ana. It is basically seeking help from Allah. وَالْعِبَادَةُ غَايَةٌ وَالْإِسْتِعَانَةُ وَسِيلَةٌ. Seeking help, okay, worship is a goal, and seeking help is a means. A goal is intended in and of itself, وَالْوَسِيلَةُ مُرَادَةٌ لِغَيْرِهَا, but a means is sought for other than itself. Okay, maybe if I just do a little diagram, maybe just to help you understand this point. So sabr, okay, so sabr for Allah is ibadah, it's worship. Sabr by Allah, yani billah, it's seeking aid. You're seeking aid from Allah. This is what we call isti'ana. Now, ibadah is a goal. Seeking aid is a means. Hence, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. It is you we worship, that's our goal, and it's you we seek help in. That's our means to help achieve that goal. And what is better? Okay, what is better? A goal or the means? Clearly, the goal is better than the means. Okay, because the goal is intended in and of itself, and the means is intended for another purpose. Okay, لغيرها. ولأن الصبر به مشترك بين المؤمن والكافر والبر والفاجر فكل من شهد الحقيقة الكونية صبر به. So sabr through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something which is mushtarak. It's something which is, you find everyone does, okay, whether you're a believer or a disbeliever. Okay, meaning there are disbelievers that seek patience through God. Okay, so you find a disbeliever saying, oh God, grant me strength. Oh God, give me strength. Give me sabr. Yeah. So even a kafir will have sabr billah. Okay, likewise, bar and fajr, okay, righteous people, evil people. فَكُلُّ مَنْ شَهِدَ الْحَقِيقَ الْكَوْنِيَّ صَبَرَ بِهِ. Everyone who witnesses the reality of creation, okay, who recognizes there is a God, will have sabr billah. Will have sabr billah. Okay. Obviously, but you will have mulhideen, you will have atheists who won't believe in God. Okay, so remember, obviously, atheists didn't really exist in Ibn Qayyim's time as they exist today. So there will be a lot of people who won't have sabr billah, because they don't believe in God. Yeah. أمر الصبر له أما الصبر له. As for sabr for the sake of Allah, that's فمنزلة الرسل الأنبياء والصديقين. That's the station of prophets, messengers, and the righteous. وأصحاب مشهد إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. That's the people of إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. So therefore, that's another argument to say that sabr lillah is of a greater status. ولأن الصبر له, again another argument, sabr for the sake of Allah, صبر فيما هو حق له, then this is a true sabr, that's something that he is entitled to. محبوب له مرضي له, it's something that Allah is beloved, it's beloved to Allah, something that pleases him. وصبر به, and sabr through Allah, قد يكون فيه ذلك وقد يكون فيما هو مسخوط له. It could be something that Allah loves, but it could be something that Allah hates. That you're seeking sabr through Allah. Say if the person wants to do something which is terrible, but he wants God to grant him patience to be able to deal with that. وقد يكون في مكروه أو مباح. It could be regarding a makruh action. It could be something which is a mubah action. فأين هذا من هذا? So how can you compare this type of sabr to that type of sabr? Meaning sabr lillah, and compare to, between sabr billah and sabr lillah. So basically, Ibn Qayyim's view is that sabr lillah is of a higher degree. وأما تسمية الصبر على أحكامه. As for sabr in dealing with his ahkam, his rulings, again these are both the shari'i rulings and the rulings relating to nature and what happens in life. صبرا عليه فلا مشاحة في العبارة. There should be no, we shouldn't be pedantic in terms of the wording. بعد معرفة المعنى, as long as you know the meaning, as they say, لا مشاحة في الاصطلاحات, as a principle the scholars they mention, people shouldn't be too pedantic about the meanings of principles, as long as the meaning is clear. فهذا هو الصبر على أقداره. Then this is in relation to the sabr in dealing with Allah's aqdar, his qadr, what he has decreed in life. وقد جعله الشيخ في الدرجة الثالثة. The shaykh has put it at the third grade or the third degree. وقد عرفت بما تقدم, and you already know from what has preceded, أن الصبر على طاعته, that sabr in dealing with that sabr with in relation to acts of worship, والصبر عن معصيته, and sabr in relation to sins, أكمل من الصبر على أقداره, this more complete than sabr in dealing with trials and tribulations and what Allah has decreed. كما ذكرنا, as already preceded, فإن الصبر فيهما صبر اختيار وإيثار ومحبة. Because the sabr that is in relation to sins and good deeds, it's a sabr of choice. It's a sabr of choice and preference and love. Meaning you are adopting sabr out of choice. You're not adopting sabr because you have to. There's a difference. If you have to have sabr because you have no other choice, like when someone dies, is that a matter of, is that a choice for you? No, it's not. So you're forced to have sabr. But if you're asked to do something which is a matter of choice and you have sabr, then that obviously indicates that that's a high degree of sabr. وَصَبْرُ عَلَى أَحْكَامِهِ الْكَوْنِيَّةِ, and sabr in relation to what Allah decrees in terms of natural law and what He decrees in terms of incidents and occurrences. Sabrun darura. It's a necessity in the sense that that's something you cannot escape. وَبَيْنَمَا مِنَ الْبَوْنِ مَا قَدْ عَرَفْتَ, and between the two there's a huge difference, a sea of difference between the two types of patience, which you should already know and they'll be spoken about before. وبذلك كان صبر إبراهيم وموسى ونوح عليهم الصلاة والسلام على ما نالهم في الله باختيارهم وفعلهم ومقاومتهم قومهم أكمل من صبر أيوب على ما ناله في الله من ابتلائه وامتحانه بما ليس مسببا عن فعله. And it's by this that you know that the sabr of Ibrahim, the sabr of Musa, the sabr of Nuh, that was the sabr that they had to endure, or they had to endure that sabr based upon what they chose to do. So Ibrahim, for example, he was commanded to sacrifice his son. Musa alayhi salam, he had the commandments and the alwah, the tablets. He had to deal with Bani Israel. Nuh alayhi salam had to build the ark and face the kufr of his people. These were things that he had to do, and they had to manage. And them challenging and dealing with their people, that sabr is greater than the sabr of Ayyub alayhi salam, because he had nothing to do with what his tribulation, in the sense that this was something that afflicted him. It wasn't a matter of choice for him, and so therefore the sabr of those prophets is greater. And look how these prophets are ulul azm min ar-rusul. They are the great prophets of Allah and messengers. وَكَذَلِكَ صَبْرَ إِسْمَعِيلَ, and likewise the sabr of Ismail al-Thabih, the one who was about to be sacrificed, and the sabr of his father Ibrahim على تنفيذ أمر الله, in the sabr in implementing the command of Allah. That sabr أكمل من صبر يعقوب على فقد يوسف. That sabr is more complete than the sabr of Yaqub when he lost his son. When he lost his son Yusuf, that pain, that sabr he needed to have, sabrun jamil, was a difficult sabr. But it wasn't as difficult as the sabr of Ibrahim, who was about to sacrifice his son. And that's not a matter of choice. Okay, that was a matter of choice. He could have easily have left it, but he chose to do it. But the sabr of Yaqub, he had to endure. He had no other option. Oh, have I skipped a page? No, okay. فعلمت, so if you know this, أن الصبر لله أكمل من الصبر بالله. So if you know that sabr lillah, for the sake of Allah, is more complete than the sabr billah, this is Ibn al-Qayyim's view. والصبر على طاعته والصبر عن معصيته أكمل من الصبر على قضائه وقدره. And that sabr in dealing with, in relation to good deeds and staying away from sins, is more complete than the sabr in relation to what Allah has decreed of trials and tribulations. If you know all of this, then you will know that this is to be the case. Wallahu al-musta'an wa alayhi tukalan wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So that concludes that part. فَإِن قُلْتَ, now if you say الصبر بالله أقوى من الصبر لله, now this could be a counter argument. And if you were to say that sabr billah is stronger than a sabr lillah, meaning it requires more strength. To have sabr billah requires more strength than a sabr lillah. فإنما كان بالله كان بحوله وقوته. Because whatever you do for the sake of, through the, by Allah, the sabr that you have by Allah, Okay, that is obviously by the hawl and the quwwah of Allah, by the might and power of Allah. وما كان به لم يقاومه شيء ولم يقم له وهو صبر أرباب الأحوال والتأثير. Okay. Yes, so where were we? So فإنما كان بالله كان بحوله وقوته. The sabr for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فإنما كان بالله كان بحوله وقوته وما كان به لم يقاومه شيء ولم يقم له. And the sabr through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through His might and power. And that which bihi lam yuqawimhu shay. If a person basically has sabr through Allah, there is nothing that can essentially challenge him in his sabr. And this is basically the sabr of the arbab al-ahwal wa ta'thir. This is the sabr of the devout worshippers, and basically the seekers. And arbab al-ahwal is a phrase to refer to people who engage in spirituality and people who have mastered it, basically. وَصَبْرُ لِلَّهِ صَبْرُ أَهْلِ الْعِبَادَةِ وَالزُّهُدِ. Whereas, and again, this is he's trying to give a counter argument here to his opinion. وَصَبْرُ لِلَّهِ صَبْرُ أَهْلِ الْعِبَادَةِ وَالزُّهُدِ. And the sabr for the sake of Allah is the sabr of the worshippers and ascetics, okay, which said that they're a degree lower than أرباب الأحوال, those who have reached higher spiritual stations. ولهذا هم مع إخلاصهم وصبرهم لله أضعف من الصابرين به. And it's for this reason that despite them being sincere, people who do sabr lillah, despite them being sincere, they're weaker than those who have sabr through Allah. فلهذا قال وأضعف الصبر لله. And for this reason it was said that sabr is Imam al-Harawi's words, that the weakest sabr is the sabr lillah. So this is an argument that Imam al-Harawi would have probably used. Okay, that's what we're assuming, that one of the reasons why sabr billah is better or considered of a higher degree is because it requires more strength. It's aqwa min as-sabr lillah. Qila, okay, so he said, okay, if that's the case, then it is said al-maratibu arba, meaning this is the way we can potentially respond to this. That there are 4 levels, okay, and this will go back to Zakaria's point about the 2 sabrs coexisting. Yeah. So ihdaha, one of the levels is martabatul kamal, and that's the most complete, perfect level. Then this is the martaba of ulul azm, of ulil azm. This is the station of the prophets. This is sabrun lillahi wa billah. So you do it for the sake of Allah and through Allah. That's the highest level. فيكون في صبره مبتغيا وجه الله صابرا به ومتبرئا من حوله وقوته. And this is when a person basically does the action for the sake of Allah. He's sabiran bihi, he is patient through Allah, and he declares himself free from any might or power. Basically, he renders himself completely powerless in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهَذَا أَقْوَى الْمَرَاتِبُ وَأَفْضَلِهَا. That's the highest degree. The second degree, أَلَّا يَكُنْ فِيهِ لَا هَذَا وَلَا هَذَا. And that the second degree is where a person doesn't have either, doesn't have sabr lillah or billah. فَهَذَا أَخَصُّ الْمَرَاتِبِ. This is like the worst level, the lowest level. So he's not going in an order here. وَأَرْدَأُ الْخَلْقِ. This is the most despised of creation. They have no sabr lillah and they don't seek sabr billah. وَهُوَ جَدِيرٌ بِكُلِّ الْخُذْلَانِ وَبِكُلِّ حِرْمَانِ. This person deserves, loss and disgrace in this life. The third level, مَنْ فِيهِ صَبْرٌ بِاللَّهِ. This is the person who has sabr billah through Allah. وَهُوَ مُسْتَعِينٌ مُتَوَكِّلٌ عَلَى حَوْلِ اللَّهِ وَقُوَّتِهِ. This is a person who seeks aid through the power and might of Allah. مُتَبَرِّئٌ مِنْ حَوْلِهِ وَقُوَّتِهِ. He basically renders, again, he frees himself from any power and might. ولكن صبره ليس لله. But his sabr is not for the sake of Allah. It's not lillah. إذ ليس فيما هو مراد الله الديني منه. Since he's not intending anything religious through his sabr. فهذا ينال مطلوبه. This person will achieve what he aims to achieve in terms of worldliness. ويظفر به, he will attain it. ولكن لا عاقبة له, he will have no good end. Meaning he won't be rewarded for his, because he's been patient for worldly reasons. وربما كانت عاقبته شر العواقب, and maybe his ending would be the worst of endings, because he did it for a wrong reason, not for the sake of Allah. And that could be, for example, somebody, he has sabr billah, but it's purely for a worldly thing. Okay, to buy an expensive car. Okay, he wants to buy an expensive car, but he has no sabr. So he says, "Oh Allah, give me sabr, give me sabr, give me sabr." So his sabr is billah. Is it for the sake of Allah though? No, his sabr is not for the sake of Allah. His sabr is for the sake of a car. It's not for the sake of Allah, but for the sake of a car. So this person will get, and he will get what he wants, but he's not doing it for any religious gain. So that is sabr, sabr billah, okay, which obviously it's not the way that Imam al-Harawi looked at it, but nonetheless. وفي هذا المقام خفراء الكفار وأرباب الأحوال الشيطانية. And you find this to be the station of essentially disbelievers and people who adopt the satanic ways. فإن صبرهم بالله لا لله. Okay, because they sabr by Allah, but not for the sake of Allah. ولا في الله, not for the sake. ولهم من الكشف والتأثير بحسب قوة أحوالهم وهو من جنس الملوك الظلمة. فإن الحال كالملك يعطاه البر والفاجر والمؤمن والكافر. Okay, so basically he's saying that these are people who are not doing things for the sake of Allah. They're doing it for their own worldly gains, and even for haram means as well, for haram things as well. So basically he's saying that seeking sabr through Allah, okay, this Ibn Qayyim, yeah, he's saying that seeking sabr through Allah is not intrinsically, doesn't make that thing intrinsically good. It depends who you're doing it for. So what makes it virtuous is who you're doing it for. الرابع, the fourth level is من فيه صبر لله. A person who has sabr lillah, لكنه ضعيف النصيب من الصبر به, but he is very weak in terms of attaining sabr through Allah. والتوكل عليه, and relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. والثقة به, and having trust in Allah. والاعتماد عليه, and relying upon. فهذا له عاقبة حميدة. This person will have a praiseworthy ending, because he's doing it for the sake of Allah, but he hasn't resigned himself to Allah completely. This is the point. ولكنه ضعيف عاجز. This person is weak. He's weak. مخذول في كثير من مطالبه. That he is basically, he won't achieve many of his things that he wants to achieve in life. لضعف نصيبه من إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. Due to the weakness that he has of إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين, of fulfilling that. فنصيبه من الله أقوى من نصيبه بالله. So what he achieves from Allah, or what he attains from Allah, will be more than what a person who seeks sabr through Allah will attain, because he's doing it for the sake of Allah. فهذا حال المؤمن الضعيف, and this is the state of the weak believer. The weak believer. Although he's still a believer, because he's doing it for the sake of Allah, but he's not seeking it through Allah, and that is the point. وصابر بالله لا لله. As for the sabir billah, we're going to finish soon actually. This is the last bit, inshallah, so we're finishing up. وصابر بالله, the one who seeks sabr through Allah and not for the sake of Allah, حال الفاجر القوي, he is like a strong evil person. وصابر لله وبالله حال المؤمن القوي. And the sabir lillah and billah, that's the state of a strong believer. And as we know, as the Prophet said, وَالْمُؤْمِنَ الْقَوِيِّ خَيْرٌ وَأَحَبُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ الضَّعِيفِ. The strong believer is greater and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer. So basically, adopt both sabrun lillah wa billah. That's the key thing. فَصَابِرٌ لِلَّهِ وَبِاللَّهِ عَزِيزٌ حَمِيدٌ. And again, just to conclude that point, that the sabir, for the sake of Allah and through Allah, he is praiseworthy, he is azizun, he is mighty in that sense. وَمَنْ لَيْسَ لِلَّهِ, but the one who has sabr not for the sake of Allah and not through Allah is madhmoom, makhdhul, is disgraced in this life. وَمَنْ هُوَ بِاللَّهِ لَا لِلَّهِ قَادِرٌ مَذْمُوم. And the one who does it who has sabr through Allah but not for the sake of Allah, again, is qadirun madhmoom. Again, he's not praised and blameworthy, in fact. وَمَنْ هُوَ لِلَّهِ لَا بِاللَّهِ عَاجِزٌ مَحْمُودٌ. And the one who does it, this is just concluding it basically, and the one who does it for the sake of Allah but not through Allah, he is basically weak but is praiseworthy at the same time. فبهذا التفصيل يزول الاشتباه في هذا الباب. And with this detail that we have just mentioned, any ambiguity that might occur hopefully will be removed. ويتبين فيه الخطأ من الصواب. And what is correct will become clear from that which is incorrect, i.e. in relation to what he thought of Imam al-Harawi's statement. And by that, alhamdulillah, we have completed the section relating to sabr from Madārij al Sālikīn. Alhamdulillah, we managed to do it in 5 sittings. Allah knows best whether this will continue or not. I will be sending a Google document to you for you to fill in to see whether we can continue. As you know, Ramadan will be starting very soon, and from what I quickly managed to see in the break, it looks like the Ramadan will start on the first fast will be on a Friday. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us reach Ramadan and that He grants us all a successful Ramadan, that He accepts our fasts and our prayers. Ameen. And Jazakumullah khair to all of you for attending this class. Alhamdulillah, this has been the size of the class has been very good throughout, even though it's dropped from the beginning, but nonetheless, alhamdulillah. I pray you've all benefited, inshallah, and that it's given you more insight into the world of suluk and spirituality. And this is something that we need to step up in our in our studies, in our reading, in the things that we listen to. We need to go beyond the basic reminders that we constantly hear day in and day out. If you really want to develop, these are the sort of things that you want to be trying to study and listen, inshallah. So hopefully this will be an impetus for you to study these things further, inshallah. I don't want to use this as a platform to advertise Tawfiq Online or anything, but if you are interested in studying things like this further, then Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin is a book that we've been teaching, which is another book which is quite similar to Madārij al Sālikīn. It's a smaller book, but it's very similar in nature, and it's a book that I believe everyone should try, and anyone who has high ambitions in life to become more devout and closer to Allah is a book they should really study from beginning to end. So do have a look out for that. We will be hopefully teaching that on a Tuesday evening after Ramadan. I will be releasing the next term's classes, which we will start after Ramadan. So as you know, we have classes every evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every evening, inshallah, for different topics, tafsir, fiqh, etc. So do have a look out for that, inshallah. I'll be sending out reminders anyway for you to follow, inshallah. Okay, let me just see. I've missed a lot of comments, so I'm just quickly going to scroll up just to see what I've missed. With respect to the view that sabr in calamity is the lowest because there is no choice but to be patient, can this be challenged because the person going through the calamity does have a choice? He can despair, he can curse, he can turn to a haram solution. Can someone who loses a child compare to someone who has to make wudu with cold water? Yeah, see, this is a good point. This is a good point. That's why I said we should try to avoid when comparing these different levels of sabr. There's always going to be different degrees. Okay, there's always going to be different degrees of sabr between the three types of sabr. Okay, and that's what you should try and avoid and do, because that's not going to help you ascertain which one is greater. Okay, but definitely, losing to have sabr when losing a child is definitely more virtuous than, say, the sabr that a person has to do wudu with cold water, and person will be more rewarded. Yeah. But the idea here is, it's true that with sabr due to a calamity, you do have a choice in terms of whether to adopt sabr or not. That's different here. That you can also have that question could be posed to someone when it comes to a sin and a good deed. That's also an option for them. So that option to adopt sabr applies to all three categories. All three categories. But the thing that sabr due to calamity that it doesn't have, that the other two have, is the fact that you have no say in whether that calamity occurs or not. So you're basically boxed into a corner. You're almost forced to try and adopt sabr. You're being pushed along the way. Okay, as opposed to someone, for example, wanting to perform Qiyamul Layl. Okay, and there is no impetus, there's nothing pushing him really strong to want to have sabr, like someone who loses a child. In that situation, they're telling themselves, look, I need to have sabr, I need to have sabr. Those two can't be compared. And I'm probably guilty of what I've told people not to do, which is to compare two situations. But I think you got the point, hopefully, inshallah. Tukalan is like tawakkul, basically. Right. Over Ramadan, as I said, I will contact you all about whether you want to carry on with reading from Madārij during Ramadan, inshallah. With regards to the Prophet ﷺ crying, there is also an explanation by Ibn Taymiyyah that the Prophet ﷺ was more complete in his emotional intelligence and khuluq, so he displays all emotions as a complete human, whereas some others are incapable. That's a very good point. Jazakallah khairan, Faris. That's a very good point. Okay. Right, I've taken a lot of your time already, and people are starting to leave. So, inshallah, Jazakumullah khairan to you all. And inshallah, as I said, I'll be in contact. And If you do have any questions regarding Tawfiq Online, feel free to send a message to the Tawfiq Online number or send us an email, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan, everybody. Subhanakallah bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.